My son and his new wife looked me in the eye and said, "We got married yesterday, only special people were invited." A sharp ache hit my chest, but years of quiet strength kept my voice steady and my face calm. That same evening, I began a private plan to protect my finances and my dignity, step by deliberate step. And that shocking moment was just the beginning of a journey that would test every boundary I'd ever drawn. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, letting me know where you're watching from. Late afternoon sunlight slid across the living room floor as I set 2 teacups on the coffee table. The ceiling fan murmured above, stirring the warm May air that smelled faintly of cut grass from my San Antonio yard. I sat across from my son and his wife and asked almost playfully, "So when is the wedding?" Kirill exchanged a glance with Lyle and let a small smile sharpen at the edges. "We got married yesterday," she said, her voice light but edged with triumph. "We only invited special people." Lyle gave the smallest shrug as if that explained everything. My breath caught a quiet pause that said more than words. I held my teacup steady, the porcelain warm against my palm, and stayed silent. My eyes wandered to the garment bag still hanging in the hallway closet. Inside waited the pale pink dress I had chosen weeks ago, a matching pair of shoes, and an unfinished envelope for a gift I would never give. On the refrigerator door, a magnet held an HEB receipt from last Friday. Proof of groceries I bought for a celebration that never came. All of it suddenly felt like props from someone else's life. Lyle fidgeted with the television remote, flipping it over in his hands as if it might produce the right words. I offered cookies just to keep the room civil. He nodded without looking at me. I placed my phone face down on the table, but the screen lit anyway, pulsing like a silent witness. A notification glowed through the glass. Carol tagged in an album white dress champagne flutes, her parents beaming. I didn't tap it. The preview alone was enough. No trace of me. The caption read, "A perfect day with our special people, time-stamped, 5:14 p.m. yesterday." My chest tightened, but my face stayed still. Numbers and dates began to line up in my mind, the quiet arithmetic of a former bookkeeper. Last week's emergency oil change, the sudden request for cash. Each memory slotted itself like columns in a ledger I hadn't meant to keep. Carol rose first, smoothing her skirt. "Thanks for letting us use the couch when we moved," she said brightly. Lyle muttered, "We'll call." I walked them to the door, the porch heat wrapping around us. My voice remained even as I wished them a safe drive. When their car pulled away, the house exhaled into silence. I lowered myself onto the cushion where Lyle had sat, its warmth fading fast. My phone now lay unlocked on the table, a frozen glimpse of the album staring back. I chose not to text or demand an explanation. Instead, I slipped the pink dress back into its garment bag, zipped it shut, and clipped the receipt beside it. Details matter. Details last. At my desk, I opened a small notebook and wrote one deliberate line, "Yesterday wedding. Not invited." Caption, "Only special people." Time 5:14 p.m. The pen left a groove of quiet resolve. I would not raise my voice. I would raise my standards. The house settled into its night rhythm wood framing, creaking as if exhaling. Cicadas droned through the open window above the sink, their chorus a steady pulse against the quiet. I cleared a corner of my kitchen table, sliding the checkbook aside and laying down a sheet of ledger paper. Tonight wasn't for sleeping. Tonight was for counting, not confronting. My phone lit with a soft chime. A text from Lyle blinked across the screen, "Rent's overdue. Can you send today?" Like every month, a heart hands emoji floated at the end as casual as a shrug. I let the message rest there, unsent reply, forming only in my head. Instead, I tapped the header, captured a screenshot with the date and time, and filed it to memory. The next notification stung deeper. I finally opened the wedding album I'd ignored earlier. Carol stood center frame in a white dress, her parents lifting champagne flutes. The caption read, "Only special people today." I took clean screenshots of every frame, each smiling face, an unspoken confirmation. I saved them carefully as though sealing a letter for a future jury. I drew a fresh line across the top of the ledger page and wrote, "Transfers and gifts 36 months." My old bookkeeper instinct slid back like a well-worn cardigan. 3 neat columns waited for numbers: rent, groceries, favors. Rent first, $500, 36 months. I wrote the multiplication and underlined the total, 18,000. Next to the figure, I drew small tick marks, 3 bundles of 500, a quiet rebuke that no emoji could soften. Groceries followed, $200, 36 months, 7,200. I stapled 2 recent HEB receipts to the page, their faded ink proof of a habit, not a single kindness. Gifts and niceties came next. Birthdays, Christmas anniversaries, about 3,000. I listed the sofa, the rug, the lamp, each tied to a date, remembering how Carol had thanked me today for the couch, like it was an afterthought. Emergencies blurred into personal expenses, medical visits, 800 car loan, 2,500, an AC repair, 600, the living room set, 1,200. I added a quiet note wedding dress, deposit receipt pending verification. When the final sum appeared, I circled it twice in red pencil, $33,400. Beneath it, I wrote, "I am not a bank. I am a mother." The ink bled slightly into the paper, a small but lasting mark. I opened my laptop and created a new folder. Family Financial Support Evidence. Screenshots slid in one by one: Lyle's text, the wedding caption, photos of receipts, and the fresh ledger page. Digital order for an emotional mess. For a moment, I drafted a message: "Transfers stop. We will talk when respect returns." I read it once, then deleted it. Silence would be my message for now. Pale light began to slice through the blinds as dawn approached. The ledger glowed softly in the first trace of day. I rested my pen beside the total and whispered to the empty kitchen. Decisions will be made in daylight and recorded with the same calm ink. By late morning, the kitchen had the clean, bright look it always gets when the sun angles over the sink and the counter shows every crumb. I gathered what mattered: the ledger page with the red circled total, a few HEB receipts, and the screenshots I'd printed as thumbnails in case my phone decided to act up at the wrong moment. I slid everything into a manila envelope and pressed the clasp flat with my thumb. Today wasn't for speeches. Today was for updating instructions. Blanco Road shimmered in the heat, the kind that makes the distance wobble. The bank's doors whooshed cool air over my arms as I stepped in. Fluorescents hummed. A toddler squeaked somewhere near the brochures. I took a number and looked around like I always did. Bookkeeper eyes cataloging the trivial, a potted snake plant, a scuffed corner on the rug, a bowl of dum-dum lollipops by the kids' coloring pages. I noted the time on my small spiral pad and the teller's nameplate, Kara, even though I didn't need a teller. I asked, softly but clearly, to see the branch manager about scheduled transfer changes. They showed me to a glassed-in office with a tidy desk and a framed photo of 2 boys in baseball uniforms. The plaque read, "Garrison Klein." He shook my hand the way Texans do when they mean to be respectful but not nosy. "What can we take care of for you today, Miss Renard?" I set the envelope down and drew out the top page. "I'm here to terminate a series of automatic transfers effective today," I said, passing him the printed schedule I'd kept because I keep everything. He looked over the list, eyes moving the way an auditor's do, left margin, right margin. Totals. He cleared his throat. "Are you sure you want to stop these? It looks like they've been running a while." His tone wasn't pushy, just the cautious question people ask when they see a habit ending. "I'm certain," I said, "and I'd like confirmation in writing for my records." It came out calm even. My voice decided to be useful today. He nodded. "We can do that." He clicked through a screen and printed the transfer schedule with the bank's letterhead. Then he opened a drawer and drew out a red self-inking stamp I hadn't seen in years. He looked at me as if to say, "You sure I tilted my chin a millimeter?" The stamp came down with a firm, flat sound that carried its own verdict: canceled. The letters bloomed through the paper like a stoplight turned solid. He stamped again on a second copy and slid both toward me. I took out my pen. 2 copies, please. 1 for my files, 1 for my daybook. He smiled, impressed in the way men often are when women show we've been doing this longer than they've been noticing. We moved to what he called security hygiene. I changed my account alerts to both text and email toggled daily balance notifications on and removed a secondary view I'd once allowed because at the time it felt like trust. He printed a neat checklist of the updates, and I initialed each line as he read them back. Alerts added shared access, removed contact preferences, confirmed. Each sheet went into my envelope, edges squared corners. True. Anything else we should do while you're here? He asked. Yes, I said. Please add a note to my profile. Speak only to me about this account. If anyone calls with questions, ask for my written authorization because it won't be coming. He typed. Then turned the screen so I could see the text exactly as it would appear. I nodded. The exact wording mattered. When it was done, I thanked him and stood. The bowl of candy on the way out glinted like bait in a river. I walked past it and into the hard, honest sun. A short, practical sentence settled in my chest. Decisions, not explanations. At home, the porch boards were hot enough to warm my soles through my sandals. Cicadas sawed the air into strips. I unlocked the door and set the envelope on the entry table like a guest I trusted. A knock sounded before I could take a breath. It was Lacey from across the street, her gray hair pulled back with a rubber band, 2 ceramic mugs in her hands. "You up for some company?" she asked, as if she'd been waiting for the heat to give her permission. I said, surprised by how quickly the answer arrived. We sat on the shaded steps where the fig tree tries each spring to pretend this is more hill country than city. Lacey handed me a mug, strong coffee with a ribbon of cream, the way Southern ladies serve comfort without commentary. She didn't ask what happened. She let the porch speak first. "My son tried it with me last year," she said, finally picking a chip in the railing paint. "Kept assuming I'd float the short month." I said yes until my stomach quit sleeping. Then one Tuesday, I told the bank to turn off the spigot. Slept like a baby that night. She smiled sideways. Took 3 weeks for the noise to die down. I learned to let voicemail earn its keep. The sentence she said next landed like a quilt over a shivering child. "What you did today, Viola, that's not a betrayal. That's a boundary. I let it sit between us the way you let biscuits cool before buttering them so the butter doesn't run off. A boundary. Not a betrayal. The difference was the size of a life. I'm worried the phone will start up," I admitted. "I don't want to get pulled into explaining." "Then don't," she said. "Let calls roll to voicemail. Create a note on paper for each one-time date gist, no adjectives. If you reply, wait until morning. If you text, draft, and delete. Keep your paper trail tighter than your temper." I took a sticky note from my pocket notebook, I always carry both, and wrote exactly what she said. The act steadied me more than the coffee. Inside, the air felt a degree cooler. I opened the envelope and laid the stamped page on the tablecloth. The red impression looked almost theatrical in the natural light. I snapped a clear photo and uploaded it to the evidence folder I'd created last night, the same place where the wedding caption sat like a rude neighbor. Then I slid the stamped copy into a clear sleeve and moved it to the front of a small binder I'd labeled in pencil, "Boundaries and Banking." A binder spine is a quiet form of courage. If I could see the word each morning, I'd be less likely to doubt myself by afternoon. We finished the coffee and didn't ruin the moment with busy talk. Lacey stood stretched and gave my forearm a squeeze that said more than a hug would have. "You'll hear knocking in different forms," she said. "Phones knock. Guilt knocks. Some folks even send a knock in a lawyer's suit. You already answered today with a stamp." After she left, I locked the door and stood under the ceiling fan in the living room, letting the slow blades remind my heart what a measured rhythm feels like. The envelope sat where I could reach it without thinking. The house held its shape around me, old wood doing its job. I looked again at the page where the stamp had landed. The red looked like a traffic light set at a permanent red, not to punish, but to prevent collisions. I breathed out for what felt like the first time since yesterday. I wrote one line in my small notebook, neat and centered, bank blanco, already 11:26 a.m. Automatic transfers, canceled alerts, added copies filed. Then I added the phrase Lacey had given me because borrowed wisdom needs a home, boundary, not betrayal. I won't raise my voice, I thought, closing the binder and sliding it onto the shelf where I keep warranties and wills. I'll keep raising my standards and my paper trail. The fan turned. Outside, the cicadas kept time. Inside, the ink held fast. The late afternoon sun slanted across my kitchen floor stripes of gold, stretching from the back door to the sink. I was slicing limes for iced tea when the front door swung open without a knock. Lyle stepped in, first followed by Carol and a trim man in a tailored jacket carrying a leather folio. My knife paused mid-cut. They still had the old key. I wiped the blade on a dish towel and steadied my breath. Next time, I said voice, even knock. Avery introduced himself with a smooth smile and a practiced handshake, already setting the folio on the table. "We just need a few minutes," he said, sliding out a neat stack of papers. "It's a temporary power of attorney. Purely practical, makes finances easier for everyone." Carol rested a manicured hand on the folder as if presenting a gift. Lyle avoided my eyes, studying the grain of the floor. I pulled out a chair for myself, not for the documents. I read the first page aloud, slow and clear, each clause, opening doors to my accounts and decisions. Avery nodded at every sentence as though I were the one making the sales pitch. "What specific circumstances require this?" I asked. "Just a safeguard," he said lightly. "And what happens if I decline? It would simply expire," he answered, glancing toward Lyle. Silence became my fourth question. I stood the packet balanced in my hand. The kitchen's metal bin waited by the counter. Without ceremony, I dropped the papers inside. The clang echoed like a gavel. "When respect returns," I said, "we'll revisit decisions. Until then, the answer is no." I held the door open. Palm steady. No yelling, no debate, only exit cues. Carol's breath sharpened into a hiss. "You're confused," Lyle murmured. "We're trying to help." "Then start by knocking," I replied. They left with stiff shoulders. The house exhaled with the click of the latch. Resolve moved faster than my heartbeat. I called Holt Hardware. Sumner Holt answered, his voice warm with recognition from church rummage sales. "Emergency same-day change," I asked. "I'll send Truitt within the hour," he said. "We can add a doorbell camera, too." At the hardware counter, Sumner laid out deadbolt strike plates and a simple camera kit. He printed an itemized receipt. I folded it into my growing evidence folder, the same one holding bank records and screenshots. Twilight deepened when Truitt arrived, toolbox in hand. We walked the perimeter together, front side back. He replaced cylinders, upgraded screws, and paired the camera to my phone using my own passcode. "Chime check," he said. We tested the night vision labeled app tabs, live clips alerts. I set notifications to on and watched the feed flicker to life. By 10 o'clock, the house felt different, lighter, as if the walls themselves trusted me again. I placed Truitt's invoice next to the bank's red stamp transfer sheet from yesterday. 2 pillars now stood, money-sealed doors secured. I brewed tea and let the cicadas sing. At 10:47, my phone buzzed, motion detected. The camera showed a grainy hand at my front knob. A key slid in, turned and failed, one clean metallic click. I saved the clip with the timestamp, labeled it, "Locks Hold." No calls, no texts. I simply locked my bedroom door and wrote a single line in my notebook, "Locks Hold, so do I." On the nightstand, I arranged the day's proofs, Sumner's receipt, Truitt's invoice, and a quiet sentence. Boundaries require hardware. The phone stayed on Do Not Disturb camera. Alerts the only exceptions. The fan above traced slow circles, and for the first time in weeks, I felt the house breathe with me. Morning light pooled against the garment bag like water against stone, soft and pale. The pink dress I bought for myself still hung untouched, the zipper tab catching a thin ray of sun. I straightened the evidence binder on the table. Bank stamp lock invoices, all the quiet trophies of the past 2 days. Today I would verify what that wedding caption implied. I opened my laptop and sorted through email folders labeled Financial Support Evidence. Filters Wedding Bridal, the last 4 digits of my card scribbled on a yellow sticky note. Each click felt like a slow inhale. A sudden chime broke the quiet new voicemail. I tapped speaker and opened the Notes app. "Hello, this is A-Line Bridal," a bright voice said. "Thank you for the deposit on the gown for Kirill Ames. We've sent a link to finalize the balance. Thank you again." A text arrived almost instantly. The preview displayed a QR invoice link boutique logo, crisp against a white background. I screenshotted the entire thread number, timestamp, and the cheerful heart emoji in the subject line, proof of the thank you I never asked for. Curiosity sharpened to clarity. I opened the link. The invoice bloomed on the screen, boutique logo, date, and a neat line of type reading, third-party payer V. Renard. Another screenshot, another silent fact. I dialed the boutique voice even. "Good morning. I'm calling for an itemized receipt of a bridal gown deposit charged to my card ending in 4416. Please include the note, payer is mother of groom." "Yes, of course," the staffer said, after confirming my email and the exact amount. Her tone never wavered, routine for her revelation for me. Moments later, the email arrived, subject payment confirmation, A-Line Bridal Gown. It listed the SKU deposit amount of $1, $250 remaining balance, and clearest of all payment by V. Renard. I saved the PDF and exported a flat image copy, tucking each into the binder's wedding costs section. The file names were as deliberate as a signature: 2025 or 513T Boutique's receipt Renard, PDF and .png. A duplicate went to a cloud folder under private encryption. From the drawer, I retrieved the paper ledger begun 2 nights ago. Neat red lines guided my pen. Wedding dress deposit $1, $250 proof attached. A small red asterisk pointed to the printed PDF now clipped behind the page. The numbers balanced. The truth balanced with them. A thought I refused to swallow surfaced anyway. A dress I never saw, bought with money that apparently made me special. Special enough to pay not to attend. I wrote a single sentence on an index card and slid it into the binder's cover. Evidence turns hurt into facts. Chain of custody habit steadied me. I emailed the documents to myself and to the encrypted vault, then photographed the computer screen showing today's timestamp. I stapled a small printout to the back of the ledger page. In the hallway mirror, I practiced 2 quiet lines for a future I could already feel coming. Here is the receipt with my name. Here is the voicemail thanking me for paying. I repeated them softly, not louder, cleaner. The kettle whistled. I sat by the window, tea in hand, watching sunlight turn the dust motes into a slow snowfall. Outrage cooled into clarity, while the binder lay open to the proof. Before dusk, I printed a new spine label for the binder, respect itemized. I pressed it into place, a small, deliberate act of permanence. I would never again buy my way into photographs. If there are photos, my name will be in the ledger of truth. The morning began with a quiet list. I opened my binder, the front sleeve still showing the red canceled stamp from the bank, and the locksmith's invoice, then the bridal receipt I printed yesterday. Today I would secure the perimeter. No one could see my credit file. Sticky notes lined my desk, freeze, fraud alert, pull reports. I read each one aloud as I typed, double-checking every field name, social security number, address before I hit submit. The first freeze went through with a soft chime. Bureau 1 emailed a PIN and confirmation number. I printed the notice, wrote the time and date in the corner, and slipped it into a folder labeled Credit Controls, 1 snowflake down. Bureau 2 asked for a phone code and warned of delays for anyone trying to open new lines of credit. Good, I said to no one. I welcomed the delay. I was finished financing other people's speed. The third bureau sent a text for verification. I answered, took a screenshot of the success page, and laid the 3 confirmations side by side like winter on my desk in May. Next came the mirror work, a full credit report from each bureau. I highlighted the familiar accounts and circled anything that looked new. One entry blinked at me. An unfamiliar retail card opened 6 weeks ago. An authorized user listed only by a single initial that wasn't mine. I dialed the issuing bank. I need to dispute an account opened using my social security number. Hold Music played a syrupy guitar line before a fraud specialist verified my identity and read the profile. An authorized user had been added from an area code I recognized. I asked for dates, application mailing address, first purchase. Each lined up with a weekend I'd spent at home. My doorbell camera clips from that Saturday proved I never left. I wrote the details in my ledger red pen, pressing harder with each number. Please lock the account and send me the dispute packet, I said. The specialist agreed, emailing digital forms and promising a paper packet by mail. A case number arrived in my inbox before the call ended. I wrote it in bold red on an index card. Fraud case, Navraker 7712. I saved every PDF with a timestamp. 2025 Farteen Pani fraud case 7712.tdf. A duplicate went to a cloud folder and I emailed the case number to myself with the subject line, Shadow Card Frozen. Back in the banking app, I set transaction alerts for anything over $1 and disabled convenience features I'd never used. Two-step verification now wrapped every open account like a fence of code. When the paperwork was done, I let the quiet return. I wrote a final note in my binder. If they needed me, they should have asked. They chose to take. Procedure, not drama, would keep my dignity intact. Before sunset, I photographed the 3 freeze confirmations beside the index card marked with the fraud case number. Beneath the image, I typed a caption for my evidence log, Winter holds. Shadow account locked. I am not a bank, I am a boundary. The doorbell chimed late Thursday morning, a double tone my camera app caught before I did. An emotion alert brightened my phone with the image of a young woman on the porch holding a clipboard and a plastic ID badge. Her stance was official, not neighborly. I breathed, once checked the live feed, and unlatched only the chain before opening the door a careful 3 inches. "Good morning," I said evenly. "Can I help you?" She held her badge toward the camera eye. Adult Protective Services. My name is Celeste. We received a wellness concern from family members. May I speak with you? I saved the clip with a tap, then opened the door just wide enough. You may step inside while I call my attorney. We'll sit at the kitchen table. Celeste waited at the threshold while I put Gideon on speaker. His calm baritone filled the room as he asked for the case number. Celeste read it aloud and Gideon replied, "My client will cooperate fully. Please limit the interview to health, safety, and financial capacity. No speculative family matters." I led Celeste to the table, where my evidence binder already waited beside the kettle, its front sleeve displaying the red-stamped bank transfer cancellations, the lock and camera invoices, the bridal gown receipt, and the 3 snowflake credit freeze confirmations stacked like winter in May. Celeste's eyes lingered on the tabs. Impressive organization. May I photograph the covers for my file? Of course, I said. Document order matters. Her questions came steady and polite. Prescription medications, none beyond vitamins. Daily living independent. Finances, secured transfers. Canceled credit reports. Frozen fraud case opened and documented. I offered to screen share the camera feed. She declined, but wrote competent with devices on her form. Gideon's voice returned through the speaker, careful and firm. Please note that the concerns you received originate from adult dependents whose funding ended recently. For the record, they are not caregivers. We request neutral language in your report. Celeste nodded and kept writing. I tapped another contact and spoke clearly when the pharmacist answered. Mr. Green, would you restate what happened with the medication note? Over speaker, his voice was steady. Mrs. Renard, I confirm Carol asked me to sign a generic statement about your prescriptions. I misunderstood and signed a brief note. I've since drafted a notarized clarification to correct the record. I'm emailing it now. Moments later, my laptop chimed with a PDF titled Affidavit Medication Pattern Clarification Notarized. I printed the sheet and slid it behind the binder's pharmacy tab while Celeste photographed the cover page for her file. For context, Gideon added we also have a security clip from last week showing an attempted entry with an old key, purely for boundary confirmation, not accusation. I cued the black and white video. The single click of a failing lock filled the kitchen. Celeste watched, once nodded, and made a brief note. At last, she closed the clipboard. Summary independent in all activities of daily living, manages finances, with documentation no immediate risk. Thank you, I said, taking the business card she offered and photographing it beside the binder for my records. Outside the porch, heat pressed in like a slow exhale, and Lacey waved from across the street. You good, she called. Good, I answered, holding up the business card like a small flag of proof, and documented. Her smile was short and knowing. No extra talk was needed. By late afternoon, an email arrived with the subject line, APS intake close, no further action. I saved it as a PDF, exported a flat image of the header, and slid a printed copy into a new divider labeled APS closed. When you name things correctly, they stop owning you. The afternoon heat rolled off the asphalt in shimmering waves as I steered my cart across the H-E-B parking lot, the smell of sun-baked concrete mixing with the citrus scent from the grocery bags. Cicadas droned a steady rhythm while I clipped my grocery list back into the binder, tucked in the cart's child seat. I had almost reached my car when a silver sedan slid into the space beside me, cutting the light. Lyle stepped out first, Carol following in dark sunglasses, their practiced smiles already in place as they blocked my trunk. I rested both hands on the cart handle and let the silence stretch. My porch camera wouldn't help here, only posture and stillness. Carol broke the quiet with a breezy accusation. You forgot the transfer again. Lyle added, the landlord's on us. Their words hung in the heat. I reached into my tote, not for my wallet, but for the small notebook that held more authority than cash. Transfers are canceled, I said evenly, in writing, at the bank. I turned so the late-day sun forced them to squint while I remained calm in its glare. Carol's voice sharpened. We'll be homeless and it will be on you. Lyle leaned closer, lowering his tone. You're confused. We need to manage your money before someone else does. Their tactics shifted from pity to threat like a rehearsed script. I opened the binder just enough to reveal the bold red canceled stamp and the stack of credit freeze confirmations without handing it over. You may photograph this cover page, I said, but not the numbers. Carol stepped forward as if to grab the binder. I moved it behind my hip, my stance still quiet but immovable. Her sunglasses reflected my face back at me. I met her eyes and delivered the line I had saved since the day she called her wedding only for special people. I only help special people. The words landed like a stone dropped in still water, no echo, just finality. A nearby cart attendant slowed, sensing the tension. Carol froze mid-reach. Lyle exhaled through his nose, a frustrated hiss. You'll regret this when you're alone, he muttered. I replied, I've been alone in rooms full of people who wanted my wallet. This is quieter. I shifted the binder into the cart, lifted the first bag of groceries, and placed it into my trunk as if the conversation had already ended. Across the aisle, a familiar blue sedan eased into a space. Lacey, my neighbor, caught the scene in an instant. Without stepping out, she raised her phone camera, already recording. I gave a small nod. She tilted the lens to capture the license plate, the store clock, the three of us framed by shimmering air. Carol noticed and stiffened. Lyle's jaw clenched. Neither moved closer. I closed the trunk and spoke once more, voice low and steady. Any further requests, email my attorney. I slid into my car and pressed the lock. The soft click felt like punctuation. Through the rearview mirror, I watched them retreat to their sedan, their practiced smiles gone. My phone buzzed before I left the lot, an airdrop from Lacey with 3 photos and a 12-second clip timestamps and the store clock perfectly visible. I saved them immediately to a folder labeled Parking Lot Encounters, tagging the date and their plate numbers. Driving home with the air conditioning humming, I recorded a quick voice note, no insults, no touch, clear no. Witness present. The heat stayed outside where it belonged. At home, I slid the eggs into the fridge, set the binder on the table, and printed one of Leslie's photos, slipping it behind the canceled page, like another piece of quiet armor. I didn't raise my voice. I raised the standard. The doorbell gave 2 quick notes, and my phone showed a man with a leather satchel posture straight as a meter stick. Not a neighbor. I opened to the chain, confirmed my name, and he passed a thick envelope through the gap. "You've been served," he said, and left my walkway with a practiced turn. I set the packet on the dining table, signed the acknowledgement, photographed the front page with the stove clock in frame, and put water on for tea. Paper deserves light, not panic. The first page wore its badge petition for temporary guardianship and listed accusations like fence posts, confusional episodes, financial mismanagement, isolation influenced by outsiders. A hearing date sat 2 weeks away. I read the packet once for shock and once for sense, then reached for the tools that make me myself: a pen, a legal pad, a stack of index cards. On the top card, I drew 3 columns: claims, evidence, gaps. Under claims, I copied each line from the petition. Under evidence, I answered with what I already held: APS case closed yesterday. Bank transfers canceled with stamped confirmation. Locks and doorbell camera installed. Bridal receipt showing my name as payer. Credit freezes at all 3 bureaus and a fraud case number. Under gaps, I wrote only formal response counsel. The table steadied my breathing. I opened my camera archive and walked the week as if it were a sidewalk. The 10:47 p.m. failed key attempt lives there in clean grayscale. Tuesday's slow pass of a dented fender at 11:12, Thursday's repeat at 11:06, and this morning's plate edge at 9:03 sit like footprints. I built a simple spreadsheet, date, time, plate, clip, name, exported 3 stills, and stitched a short silent compilation titled Exterior Visits, Pattern MP4, Pattern Not Paranoia. I called Gideon. "I've been served," I said, plain as weather. He asked the service time and the hearing date and told me to come at 4 with the packet, the index cards, and the pattern file. We answer with documents, not volume. The hours between us I spent turning the table from scatter to order tabs on the petition exhibit stacked USB labeled with today's date. By the time I locked the door, the house felt less like a stage and more like a file room. His conference room was cool and quiet. He did not ask how I felt. He asked for the packet. I slid everything across. He read the caption and made a small pencil checkmark, the sound of someone testing each plank. Confusional episodes, he read. I placed the APS closure printout. Financial mismanagement. I placed the bank's canceled schedule and the red-penciled ledger. Isolation, he said, and I set down the pharmacist's notarized clarification and the neighbor's witness photo from the parking lot. Then he dictated a letter that pulled a clean boundary around my porch. Addressed to opposing counsel, it demanded no contact at my residence, routed all communication through his office, and required preservation of all texts, emails, direct messages, social posts, and financial records related to support requests or spending. One plain sentence handled spoliation deletion now would speak for itself. His paralegal typed while he spoke. A courier waited by the door. Before the courier left, we reviewed my pattern file. He watched the 12-second door clip the 2 curb passes and the morning edge of a plate without commentary, pausing only to note timestamps. Exhibit E. He labeled it attaching stills to my spreadsheet. Then he coached me on 2 sentences for court simple enough to live in muscle memory. I live independently. I chose to end discretionary support. I am mentally capable of managing my affairs. I wrote them longhand until they read like mine. The paralegal scanned the petition and our exhibits into a single PDF with a subject line I could find in the dark. Minutes later, a delivery receipt blinked onto Gideon's screen for the demand and preserve letter. He turned the monitor so I could see the timestamp and the green check. Paper moves faster than rumor, he said. On Monday, we'll file the response and proposed order. The thing that had been floating now had a place to sit. Back home, daylight felt taller. I created a new divider, guardianship service and response, and slid the process server's card into a clear sleeve. I printed the petition's first page with my stove clock in the background and labeled it Entry 1. Behind it, I placed the demand and preserve letter with its delivery receipt. Entry 2. Behind that, I tucked a copy of my spreadsheet and still frames Entry 3. The USB went into the zip pocket inside the binder where irreplaceable things live. I made dinner to reset the room tomatoes with salt, a piece of chicken warmed from last night's HEB run, half a peach. I wrote the hearing date on a small card and slid it into the bathroom mirror frame so I would not have to carry it in my head. I set 2 alarms, one for a morning walk with Lacey and one for a review call with Gideon. I locked the front door. The deadbolt answered with the clean sound of a plan. I stood at the threshold and said the rule out loud because saying helps it harden papers can cross this line. Panic will not. The envelope still sat on the table, but the table was mine. I rinsed my cup, stacked the plates, and set my binder where morning light would find it before worry could. The case might take weeks. Tonight would take one decision sleep. I set my phone to do not disturb, leaving only camera alerts on, and turned off the lamp. The hallway outside Bexar County Probate Court was cool and humming a strip of conditioned air that smelled faintly of paper and lemon cleaner. I sat with Gideon on a wooden bench, my binder between us like a quiet engine. Across the hall, my son and his wife leaned close to a man in a navy suit I recognized from the caption page, Mr. Hale. I looked past them at the brass seal on the courtroom door and counted my breath in 4s, inhale, hold, exhale, hold, until my pulse matched the tick of the wall clock. Emergency docket. Gideon murmured, eyes on the calendar printout. This is their shot for a temporary order. The full hearing remains set 2 weeks from Thursday. I nodded. I had packed only what mattered: APS closure. The 3 credit freeze confirmations, the fraud dispute case number, the canceled transfer schedule, the boutique receipt, the parking lot photos, and the letter demanding preservation of every message they had sent into the world. All rise. Judge Miller entered robe, moving like a dark river, and the room reset around his voice. Phones silenced, bailiff's glance sweeping each row, clerk ready at her terminal. He confirmed the petition on the record and the scope for today's review of the temporary guardianship request and any threshold evidence. Mr. Hale stood first, the performance practiced. He called me confused, isolated, financially erratic, and reaching for a moral ceiling said I was under undue influence from unnamed outsiders. He placed a ring of concern around Lyle and Carl with an open palm. I kept my eyes on the seal behind the bench and let his adjectives fall like nickels that could not buy a thing I needed. When Gideon rose, he did not try to compete with any volume. Capacity, he said, pacing his syllables, is not compliance with adult children's wishes. He held a single exhibit list up like a level. The state's interest is that Mrs. Renard is safe and competent. She is. Adult children are not entitled to manage a parent into agreement. The judge inclined his head. Gideon asked to call our expert first on the limited question of capacity. Dr. Moore took the stand with the economy of someone who has taught residents for 20 years. She stated her credentials. The methods used clinical interview, standardized cognitive testing, functional assessment of financial reasoning, review of the documents I had collected. There was no sparkle-only process. The judge accepted her as an expert. She turned the pages of her report and in plain shape said, "What I already knew in my bones, my memory intact for age, my executive function above average, my judgment sound regarding discretionary gifts and boundaries." She had asked me to explain why I terminated monthly transfers. I had answered with dates accounts and my right to end a habit that harmed me. She noted device literacy, 2-step verification, the freeze triad, the fraud case, the way I named and filed each piece. These layered safeguards, she concluded, are consistent with competence, not confusion. Mr. Hale leaned forward for cross. He tried to wedge a story into her testimony, suggesting I was coached by a neighbor and overly managed by my lawyer. Dr. Moore's tone did not lift or break. Seeking counsel and community support is an adaptive response to conflict, she said. It is not a marker of incapacity. In fact, the ability to assemble appropriate supports is protective. He asked whether she had considered long-standing family dynamics. She answered that capacity is a clinical question, not a popularity contest, that the presence of conflict does not lower a brain's ability to decide. He sat down slower than he had stood. Mr. Hale called a neighbor of theirs, as his next witness a man who lived to one side of me and had never once knocked at my door to ask how I was doing. He spoke about odd activity cameras everywhere and lights on late at night. Gideon's Cross was a slow strip of tape, laid straight timestamps, camera clip file names, the late-night key attempt captured after I changed my locks, the APS closure, noting independence in activities of daily living. "Did you ever speak to Mrs. Renard directly?" Gideon asked. "No." "Did you ever offer help?" "No." "So your testimony is not based on interactions, but on assumptions from a distance." The man nodded as if the admission were nothing. It was plenty. When Mr. Hale referenced medication irregularities, Gideon slid a stamped document forward the pharmacist's notarized clarification. The judge read the first paragraph, admitted it over Mr. Hale's objection, and looked back at me. "Mrs. Renard, do you take any prescription medications affecting your cognition?" "No, Your Honor," I said. "Only vitamins. I keep their receipts the same way I keep everything else." There was a ripple of something like a chuckle from the gallery, but the judge's face did not move. Gideon called me last. I stood and the oath sounded like a level dropped onto a workbench, flat final. I said the two sentences we had practiced until they were mine in handwriting and breath. I live independently. I ended discretionary support. I am mentally capacitated. He walked me through the steps without adjectives. I told the court when and how I canceled automatic transfers and obtained stamped confirmation. I described the credit freezes and the fraud dispute I opened when a shadow line tried to live under my name. I explained the doorbell camera and the failed key at 10:47 p.m. and how I exported the clip and logged it. I referenced the bridal boutique receipt with my name as payer and the voicemail thanking me for a deposit on a dress I never saw in person. I held nothing up. I described only dates and acts. The judge's pen made small notes as if each one had the same weight. When it was Gideon's turn to address the messages they had not produced, he referenced the letter he sent after we were served, the one demanding that nothing be deleted. Texts, emails, social posts, direct messages. "We have reason to believe content has vanished since notice," he said. The judge looked over his glasses at the other table. "Any party who deletes communications after notice," he said, "invites an adverse inference at the full hearing. Preserve everything. Today, Mr." Hale nodded without breathing. My son stared at the table's lacquer. My daughter-in-law's jaw was still. Mr. Hale closed with a soft appeal to family unity and safety. Gideon returned to the language of rights, retained unless proven lost to the reports and the state agency that had already closed its file. He ended exactly where he started. Capacity is not permission to manage a mother into compliance. Judge Miller leaned back, looked at the petition, and at the exhibits tabbed in the binder the clerk had been paging through beside him. "The standard for a temporary guardianship has not been met," he said. "The request is denied." He set the full evidentiary hearing at the date already on the calendar and ordered that there be no contact at my residence and that any necessary communication go only between counsel. The gavel was a small sound, but the air in my chest moved like a window slid open. In the hallway, the bench was where we had left it. Gideon made a copy of the order for my binder and wrote today's date on the spine tab with a pen whose weight I liked. 48 hours, he said. Dr. Moore will file her final signed report, though the court has already accepted her testimony. I nodded. I did not look at the petitioners when I passed them. I did not feel the need to ask why. The door closed behind me with the same tone as the gavel, and the afternoon light in the corridor felt honest on my face. Outside, The San Antonio heat met me head-on, bright and ordinary. I walked down the steps the way I have always gone down steps, one at a time, heel, then toe binder steady in the crook of my arm. A life can be assembled like that too. One measured choice after another put in order, labeled with its right name. Capacity, not permission. That is what I carried to my car, that and the certainty that my voice did not need to rise to be heard. Tuesday began with the sound of my own house settling and the scrape of a chair as I cleared the kitchen table. I laid out the binder, opened a fresh yellow legal pad, and pressed on new tab labels I'd printed last night. Post-hearing bank fraud unit court orders home security. The quiet felt earned, not empty. I wrote the date at the top of the page and underlined it twice the way I used to mark month-end closeouts at the school. Then I dialed the credit union's fraud desk and set the phone on speaker. Hold music looped through piano, then strings. I kept my case number on a sticky note by the mug, rehearsing the dates in a low voice while the kettle breathed toward a boil. Credit freezes, Wednesday dispute. Opened. Wednesday afternoon shadow card locked, capacity ruling yesterday, preservation, warning on the record. A click broke the music and a calm voice introduced herself, reading back my name and the case ID. She verified my address and the last 4 digits of my social, then recited the outline I had already written. Freeze confirmations from all 3 bureaus. The dispute packet filed the unauthorized inquiry 6 weeks ago. No history of missed payments or confused transactions. Mrs. Renard, she said, based on documentation and your timeline, we see no indicators of elder exploitation originating from your activity. We do see a third-party attempt to open a retail line using your number, which is now locked and under investigation. I'm emailing you a letter of record. I refreshed my inbox and watched the subject line arrive. No finding of elder exploitation. Unauthorized inquiry flagged. Consumer protections active. I saved the PDF, printed it, and slipped it behind the APS closure from last week. 2 agencies. 2 conclusions that both said I was not what they were trying to name me. By mid-morning, I was in Gideon's office with the letter on top of my stack. He grinned without showing teeth. "This boxes them in," he said, and dictated a 1-page notice to opposing counsel attaching the fraud unit finding. He kept the tone neutral. No victory laps, just a clean record, and hit send with me watching the outbox. We didn't have to wait long. The reply arrived inside the time it takes to read a paragraph twice they intended to file a voluntary dismissal of the guardianship petition to preserve family harmony. Gideon circled that phrase and wrote, "Translation in the margin, avoid discovery and spoliation risk. They heard the judge," he said. "They don't want their texts on the record." The e-file confirmation pinged before lunch. Petition for guardianship voluntary dismissal with the clerk's digital stamp and a time exact to the second. Gideon forwarded the receipt to me and drafted our acknowledgement that we would not seek costs. "You don't have to be magnanimous," he said, "but it reads well if you are." And it closes the door. I initialed the margin and slid the printout under a new divider. We moved to housekeeping a will review that kept my small bequests intact and added 2 charities from the museum docent list, a codicil clarifying executor succession, a healthcare directive reaffirmed without changes. I initialed each page not out of fear, but to keep future hands from inventing memory. We walked to the notary kiosk on the ground floor. The clerk checked my ID twice, placed the seal, and the thunk of the stamp felt like a small ceremony that belonged to me. At home that afternoon, I rotated the alarm code and updated the allowed list on the security panel. Lacey stays, Truitt stays, for maintenance calls. Everyone else moves to counsel only. I removed any shared keys noted at the hardware store and emailed Sumner to confirm my file reflected the change. The doorbell camera app asked for my passcode again, a feature I had turned on last week, and I felt the good kind of friction as I typed it in. When the motion alert chimed near 3, I checked the live view and watched a slow roll past my curb with a window down. No one got out. No one knocked. I called the non-emergency line and gave the dispatcher my address and the no-contact order the judge had read into the record. A patrol car idled by within the hour. The officer took the incident down, read back the number, and said he'd note the order in dispatch, so any future calls would show the court's boundary. He didn't lecture, didn't flinch, just did the part of the job that proves a city can hold you when you stand your ground. I wrote the incident number on an index card and filed a still frame from the door camera with the date-time overlay. The binder closed with a flat sound that said, "Enough for today." Lacey crossed the street with basil cuttings gathered in a damp paper towel and held up the bundle like an offering. We didn't make a speech out of it. "For your windowsill," she said. "For your lasagna," I answered, and we smiled because the sentences were small and exact. She looked over my shoulder at the quiet house and then at me. "Held," she asked. "Held," I said, and we let that be the whole report. Wednesday, we handled the last legal chore on our list. Gideon forwarded the court's notice acknowledging the dismissal and attached the judge's order from Monday, again highlighting the part about counsel-to-counsel communication only. I made a copy for the binder and one for the refrigerator where I post reminders. I want to see when I'm reaching for milk hydrate walk. Do not answer provocations in the moment. I called the bank to confirm the fraud unit letter had posted to my file. The specialist added a case note, so any branch employee would see it if someone came in with a story and a smile. She recommended I set transaction alerts at $1 on all open accounts. I told her I already had. "You're ahead of us," she said, and I heard it as a compliment instead of a warning. That afternoon, the doorbell chimed again, an orderly knock and a uniform on the live view. The same patrol officer stood on my step hat off body language loose. "Just circling back," he said when I opened the door to the chain. "We added the no contact note to your address. If anyone disputes it at the curb, we'll remind them there's a court order and log it. You don't need to answer the door unless you want to. If something escalates, call us." He handed me a small card with the incident number and his name printed neat enough to make a teacher proud. I photographed the card beside my binder just for the record. He tipped 2 fingers at the brim of his hat and left the patrol car whispering away down the block. I stood in the entry and felt the boundary like hardware I had installed and law I had asked for all of it, mine to enforce, without raising my voice. Thursday, I sat with the binder open and the calendar beside it. The spine labels read like a ladder I had climbed. Canceled locks, bridal freezes, apps closed service. Preserve court order, denied fraud. No finding dismissal, filed security, rotated incident, logged. I printed the fraud unit letter again and slid a copy into a cloud folder marked with the same name. Redundancy had become my way of breathing. I made one last call to confirm that any shared access tied to my old door code had been purged from the alarm company's system. The rep read the list, back 2 names, only both mine. "Good," I said. "Leave it that way." I changed the Wi-Fi password and wrote it in the little book where I keep verbs that help me feel like myself. Cook walk, call paint, forgive. I did not write forget. By late afternoon, the light slanted across the porch and the basil had started to perk in a jar on the rail. I opened my planner and blocked out Saturday for the museum and Tuesday for a watercolor class I'd put off for 2 years out of habit and someone else's emergencies. I added a note to call Mr. Green and thank him again for setting the record straight. I wrote it in ink so I couldn't move it to next week. The phone buzzed once with an email from Gideon dismissal entered on the docket. Case closed unless they file a new one. I replied with 2 words, "Thank you," and then closed the app. The cicadas lifted and dropped a rhythmic proof that summer still kept its own calendar. I watered the basil and listened to the water run into the soil as evenly as if a measured hand had poured it. When dusk finally softened the street, I sat on the porch step with the binder beside me and felt the heat leave the day. There was no triumphal music, no need to rehearse lines. The court had not given me back my life. It had confirmed it was mine all along. I thought about every paper I had filed, every clip I had saved, every boundary I had asked to be recognized by strangers, so the people who knew me would have to see it too. I did not win a fight. I reclaimed a schedule. Tomorrow I would walk early, take the long path behind the library, and stop where the shade gathers under the live oaks. I would be a woman who keeps receipts and keeps promises to herself. I would be exactly the kind of special I can live with, the kind that names things correctly and lets them stop owning her. 2 weeks after the court papers settled into silence, I sit beneath the live oaks in the McNay Art Museum courtyard with a sketchbook balanced on my knee and the soft sun warming the stone beneath my sandals. The air smells of rain held back and jasmine just opening. A docent passes and offers a quiet nod. I return it without words, letting my pencil hold what I no longer need to say out loud. My phone buzzes once in my bag. It's a text from Lyle. I'm sorry for how things went. I glance at the screen marked the message unread and take a screenshot for my records. Then I set it face down and return to the slow curve of the line I'm drawing across the page. Boundaries are choices you keep, even when the door feels like it's knocking. When the museum's noon chime echoes through the courtyard, I close the sketchbook and write a single reminder in my planner: keep boundaries. No replies without counsel. Outside, Lassie waits on the steps with a thermos and a grin that makes the heat feel lighter. We walk toward the parking lot and she holds out a paper cup of iced tea, her eyes catching the sun. Ready for the next stop, she asks, and I nod. At the community center, the watercolor class I joined only weeks ago is holding its small showcase. My piece, a doorway painted with light spilling across a quiet threshold, hangs on the wall with a neat card, Viola Renard, Watercolor 1. The director thanks the volunteers and invites us to sign up for the fall session. I add my name without hesitation, a small declaration that my calendar is finally mine. As we move toward the snack table, Lacey tilts her phone to me. "Look at this," she whispers. A public post from Lyle reads, "We're withdrawing our concerns and working privately as a family." The words are short and cautious, but they are there. I take a single screenshot and slip the phone back into my bag. I don't dwell, don't answer. It is evidence of a door closing on its own. Later, at the credit union, I sit across from an officer who slides a crisp endowment letter across the desk. I read the header twice. The Robert and Viola Renard Community Scholarship, and sign where the red arrows guide my pen. Funds move from my account into the new trust that will support adult education for single parents. Congratulations, the officer says, stamping the document with a clean blue seal. I breathe in the moment's quiet finality. Generosity without obligation feels like the opposite of loss. In the lobby, I pause to write myself a letter dated today. I choose generosity without obligation. I fold it and tuck it behind the post-hearing tab in my binder. Evening finds me at the neighborhood garden where friends and neighbors gather around a newly installed bench beneath the crepe myrtles. A small brass plate catches the low sun. For those who learned to choose themselves and kept choosing. The director thanks everyone for helping fund the bench and nods toward me. I simply say, "Thank you for proving that family can be chosen," and Lassie squeezes my hand. The applause is gentle like leaves, touching in a breeze, and it fills the space that used to echo with explanation. As twilight stretches across the street, the community center director asks if I'd mentor new watercolor students. I agree with clear time limits and jot recurring calendar blocks for art and morning walks, living proof that my time belongs to me first. Back home, the late sun spills across the floor as I label a fresh divider in my binder, Legacy Active. I file the scholarship letter and the garden program behind it each page, a quiet assertion that my life story will not be told in court filings, but in acts of deliberate care. I glance once more at Lyle's text before bed. I log it without reply and in the privacy of my thoughts, wish him honest work and steady ground, but not access. Some reconciliations happen inside a person, not between two. Tea in hand, I step onto the porch. The camera light blinks once and then rests a silent witness to a home fully my own. The evening air carries the scent of basil from the pot Lacey brought last week. I close my eyes and let the calm settle until it feels permanent. Some doors I close. The one that leads back to myself stays open. Looking back, I see that every quiet decision documenting setting boundaries and choosing generosity without obligation wasn't about winning against anyone. It was about honoring my own worth. If this story touched you, I hope it reminds you that protecting your independence is not selfish. It is love in action. How do you guard your own peace while still staying open to connection? Share your thoughts or simply tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to know. And if this journey spoke to your heart, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story that might inspire your own quiet victory.